Welcome to Unit 5, Section 2, the Ford and Carter years. We're talking about the time period from about 1974 to 1981. A lot of different events happened before this one. We remember talking about the Watergate scandal in our Unit 2 stuff and talking about more specifically talking about the Ford Carter years and the Watergate that which led up to these Ford and Carter years. So kind of give you a brief little synopsis here. Richard Nixon was president of the United States, and under Richard Nixon, he had committed the Watergate scandal, where he had investigated Democrats to try to make sure he could win the presidency for his second term. In his term, it is found out, and he resigns from office, and his vice president, Gerald Ford, becomes the president. Gerald Ford will serve for a couple years, but he kind of is seen as the man who pardoned Nixon, who didn't keep Richard Nixon accountable for the bad things that he had done. And so Gerald Ford kind of does not have a great image to the American people, and so he will not serve a full term himself. And what the country is really looking for up to this time is an honest, hardworking person, somebody that we can put our trust and faith and restore our faith back into. And they pick Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter is a peanut farmer from Georgia, and he is a also Baptist, I believe, or he's some kind of a Protestant preacher. And so you can't get more honest than that, right? And so we're going to be talking about this time period between Ford and Jimmy Carter, our president at that time. Now, importantly, we're not really talking about, constitutional crises now in this unit. What we're talking about is the busts, so economic downturns. And we talked about the Great Depression in the 30s. Now we're going to be talking about the 70s up into the very early 80s, where the country once again has a really bad recession and has a bunch of new terms like stagflation and all sorts of other things that come out at this time. So here's our objectives. Focus question stays the same. What symbols demonstrate that a country is struggling, right? And our standard question here is, what actually causes economic busts? What makes the country do poorly? Okay. Objective 1, what were the tough economic challenges the U.S. faced under Ford and Carter? So let's go with a little bit more detail about what specifically. We know what happened in the Great Depression. We know how hard that was for Americans, right? In this example, we're going to find out what exactly did the country face under these two presidents. Objective 2, how did Ford and Carter address these issues? So just like Hoover and FDR, there was different policies and ideas about how to fix the economy. Same thing here. These two men come in and they address the economic downturn in different ways. So we're looking at that. And our last objective, what were significant events that occurred at this time? In this objective, we're going to be looking at other things that are not necessarily economic, but other just things that are significant, important things that we would want to talk about just because we're at the time period, okay? So there's our objectives. Go ahead and pause if you need to write those down in your notebook. So let's talk about the tough road ahead. President Ford, this is what he's got when he becomes president. He's inheriting these problems. Now, Richard Nixon maybe have had a plan on this. He maybe had something he was going to do. But unfortunately for him, Watergate happens. He resigns from office. He leaves. And President Gerald Ford takes over. And this is what he's got. First off, he does not have a nice, robust economy. He has incredibly high inflation. This is... You know what inflation is. It's an increase in prices when the values of those items decreases the money value. So I still have $5, and that $5 usually would spend, I could get a gallon of milk plus a loaf of bread and a couple other things. That same $5 now can't get me even the gallon of milk. The milk hasn't changed. It's not even better than it used to be. It's the value of the money has gone down. It's not worth as much as what it was originally. One important distinction as well with this is that this happens when we print more money. So every time the United States printing press prints more money, you're going to have more in the economy, which devalues the worth of money because it's not very rare, right? There's more of it out there. So this is going to cause high unemployment. So we're going to have lots of people unemployed, not nearly as bad as the Great Depression. The Great Depression had 25% of people unemployed. It's not going to be nearly that high. Okay? It's going to cause energy problems. We have some really big problems with oil at this time period, and it's going to continue the legacy that had happened under Richard Nixon and Lyndon Johnson, which is public distrust of government. The public does not trust or actually think that their government is out for them anymore. So here's Gerald Ford. Okay, he was kind of a really, a lot of people really liked him. He was an old football player. He was very, iconic. He was a very hard-working guy, but because of what happened with Richard Nixon and him, he doesn't get to 100% live past that Watergate scandal. Okay, he sees it in this way, and I think this is really important to distinguish. He says, our long national nightmare is over. So he says, you know what? The Watergate scandal was terrible. It was horrible what my predecessor, Richard Nixon, did. Let's move on. Let's get past this. Let's get that under the bridge and get on to bigger and better things. But unfortunately, the public doesn't see it that way. They want somebody to be held accountable. Gerald Ford even tried to be humorous about it. He one time said, "I'm a Ford, not a Lincoln." Right? He's playing a pun from the Ford Motor Car Company and Lincoln Motor Company. And he's saying, I'm a Ford, not a Lincoln. And he really, even though this is a joke, it's really somewhat true. Gerald Ford was not elected ever to be the president of the United States. He finishes out Nixon's term, and he doesn't get elected. And so it really demonstrates to you that he wasn't necessarily this really popular guy. That people had never wanted him to be president. Okay. So, on September 8th, 1974, President Ford pardons Richard Nixon, and he says, let's get on to focusing on the economy. Here is the actual pardon from President Ford to Richard Nixon. Okay, a lot of people felt very betrayed. Both Republicans and Democrats felt betrayed by this. It was a really, really big problem. Now, he's going to say we need to win back the economy. And when he says win, it's going to be actually an acronym. Yes, he means win as well as be successful, but he also means win as in whip inflation now. And so he's saying we got to cut inflation. How are we going to do that? Gerald Ford is going to call on Americans to cut back their use on oil and gas. He's going to say the way we can do this is we can get rid of money and get rid of unnecessary spending, and we can do that by not using as much gas and oil as we do. We could be carpooling, we could ride our bike to work, we could do whatever it is, but if we can use less oil and gas, that's what he's really calling for, okay? Now, what we call this is a tight money policy. He's going to start cutting government spending and higher interest rates. Now, the reason he's going to cut government spending is that the deficit or debt is getting worse and worse. And so, like a conservative, a true conservative, he's going to say that's not good, and he's going to want to cut that debt out. The reason that higher interest rates occur is that's how you get rid of inflation. If you have higher interest rates, meaning banks will not loan money, or if they do loan money, the money is going to be at a higher interest rate, less people can get those loans, right? And if that's the case, less money going out into the hands of people equals a scarcity of money equals getting rid of inflation, making it so the dollar is valuable more, okay? The outcome of this is the worst economic recession in 40 years. So from the Great Depression until 2010 is absolutely the worst economic recession in that entire time period. So that tells you it's a really big time period of really bad economic downturn. Okay. Here's some other things that are just kind of nice to know. In his foreign policy, he has Henry Kissinger as the Secretary of State. Henry Kissinger is very, very controversial as far as his time period of being Secretary of State. A lot of people love Henry Kissinger. A lot of other people think that he is an evil, evil man. Okay. There's this time period of detente, which means easing of tension. He starts to negotiate with China and the Soviet Union, trying to demonstrate peace, trying to get out of this Cold War mentality of fighting. He wants to kind of get things back to normal and get things good. And he creates the Helsinki Accords, which is he gets 35 nations to come together and agree to cooperate to both make things economically better as well as peacefully better. So this is sometimes really overshadowed by Watergate. Ford does not get a lot of accolades or praise for what he did here, but these are some really good things that he did. He continues to open up China like Richard Nixon had been doing. He continues to try to help ease tensions with the Soviet Union. He gets 35 nations to agree to come together and try to fix things. These are all pretty good things, but it really gets overshadowed by two things: one, the recession, and two, Watergate. One of the greatest accomplishments that Gerald Ford was able to do is he's able to get a bunch of South Vietnamese who had surrendered, who had given up, and who were in really risk of being murdered by the Viet Cong. He was able to bring a lot of them over to the United States, give them protection, get them help. Unfortunately, Congress was really looking at our own problems and decided they would not send any aid over to Vietnam as well at that time. And so there's a lot of people who did not get the help that they necessarily needed from the Viet Cong, which cost them, a lot of them, their lives. Okay, so this is kind of like, Gerald Ford. These are some other things that happened with him. Okay, so in 1976, we have another election. And again, it comes down to two people. On the Republican side, we have Gerald Ford, and he is the guy who pardoned Nixon. He's the one that's making it so you can't get loans for a house. He's the one that's making it so the economy's not good. And he's the guy who pardoned the liar, pardoned the dude who deceived America. The other side, you have Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter said, "I will never lie to the American people. I am a Baptist preacher or whatever, and he is a God-fearing man who's never going to lie to the people." Just a very, very good, regular farming guy, American guy. Okay, and so here you have these two, and who is going to win the presidential election of 1976? Jimmy Carter. He's going to win by 40.8 million votes to Gerald Ford's 39.1 million votes. This is a very close election. We've had a couple, right? Our last one was pretty close itself. So this is a close election, and Jimmy Carter wins, though. And so people hope that he is going to be the good man that they think he is and make sure the country does successfully. Well, Gerald Ford had these problems, and now Jimmy Carter does. He has an energy crisis. Number one, the United States, our entire economy runs on oil right now, right? This is a really hard thing. This is good, right? We have a lot of good things that come from that, but there's some bad things too. One of the bad things is we have to rely on other countries to give us our oil. The outcome, this is going to have what's called the National Energy Act of 1979. Basically, a bunch of Middle Eastern countries realized how much power they had because they had oil. They realized that the United States needed this oil, and they leveraged that by saying, hey, unless we get these things, we're not going to do business with you. The United States uses an awful lot of oil, and so you can see this is the time period we're talking about here. So inflation in the United States, look at how bad it skyrockets, okay? So this is, inflation goes down really, really at these time periods right before the Depression, starts skyrocketing into the Depression, and especially right in the middle to the very end of the Depression, you see inflation really skyrocket. Now you might say, well, why is it kind of at the end of it? Well, that's because after the government has done all these different things to help build the economy, print lots and lots of money, what's going to be the effect of that? Inflation, right? Same thing here. If we look into the mid 70s, right, we can start seeing into the late 60s, into the 70s, it's skyrocketing, okay? So this is going to be a huge economic crisis. There's going to be lots of violence in the Middle East, which is going to cause this fuel shortage. People are mad at the United States, and it's going to cause a lot of tension. Look at how inflation rises. So this is how devalued your money is, right? It goes from 7.6% to 11.3%. And then in 1979, up to 14%. Guys, that's crazy. Inflation is like right now 2 or 3%. So to have it up to 14% is just, it's really hurting the U.S. economy, okay? So the standard of living for the United States goes from number one. We are the number one place. You may find that interesting. The standard of living, so meaning the best place theoretically to live in the world is, at this time period, the United States. It goes from number one to number 5, the 5th best place to live in the world. And that tells you kind of we start losing our ground a little bit there. Okay, the United States still to this day is one of the best places to live. However, it's not number one still. I think it's in the top 10, but I don't think it's even 5th anymore. So with this changing economy, a lot's changing. You have a lot less manufacturing, and you start having a lot more service type of jobs. What I mean by that is like now that we are having overseas competition, businesses start to realize that they can, now that China's opened up and now that other places like in Mexico have been opening up to us, they can send their manufacturing over to those other countries, pay those people a lot less money, and those people are still getting paid a lot more than other people in their country. And this is going to create a huge boom for both of these countries, for the business and for the country itself. The problem is by doing that, you're causing a lot of unemployment. There's a lot less people able to work in manufacturing. Now they're looking for other jobs, more skilled jobs. And a lot of these jobs are service jobs, jobs that require not, you're not just at like a factory line where you're just twisting nuts and bolts. You are now doing a service of, something else, something that's a little bit more skilled, something that's a little bit more complicated. So we have a lot of people who just don't meet that level. And so you're going to see a lot of unemployment raised because of this time period. Some other interesting things about Jimmy Carter is he was an advocate for the civil rights. He had the administration include more African Americans and women than any other time period or any other presidency at that time. A famous lawsuit called Regents of UC versus Bake helped establish that women should be much more influential into those things. He has, excuse me, he has what's called realpolitik or human rights and foreign relations that are going to be pretty interesting, right? And the reason this is going to be so interesting is he's going to be playing a much different game than a lot of the other presidencies or presidents at this time. Okay, um, he's going to be what's called, instead of looking at something and saying, very practical reasons. Um, he's going to say, I'm going to make decisions based on moral decisions, ideological decisions. So, meaning he's not, um, he's going to look at people and he's going to say, you know what? Before we did business with you because you were, it just made economic sense for us to do business. And he's going to say, no, no, no. We're not doing business with you, not just economically, but if you're not a good person, if you're not morally treating your people right, we're also not going to do business with you. So he's going to be seen as this kind of guy who is out for justice. And a lot of people really like this idea. They like, hey, the United States should stand by its values and they shouldn't do business with people who don't have those same values. The problem is that it's not going to always work for him. So for instance, he's going to praise Bashar Assad and he's going to help Bashar Assad keep and maintain power in Syria, even though Assad is a horrible, to this day, a horrible leader who's killed many, many of his own people, right? So Carter is going to kind of, although he doesn't believe in realpolitik, he doesn't do that. He unfortunately follows it to a degree, whether he likes it or not. And he's going to really use this moral guide thinking he's doing what's right, but a lot of people see him as a hypocrite. So he's going to establish human rights. In 1977, he and Panama are going to have a treaty, and this is going to officially give up our ownership of the Panama Canal by December 31st, 1999 to Panama. So the United States, if you don't remember this, the United States built the Panama Canal under Teddy Roosevelt in the early 20th century. And then the United States in 1977 said, hey, give us 20 or so more years, and then we're going to give the power and the Panama Canal to you back, right? This is going to improve U.S. relations with a lot of Latin American countries. It's going to make them much happier because they're going to feel like the United States is giving them rightfully their land back, okay? This is going to give him a lot of support, and Carter is going to go for these human right policies and try to get out of this detent and Cold War tensions. Okay, he is going to keep people in Afghanistan against the Soviet invasion. This is where people like Osama bin Laden get trained with the U.S. military, is because we are trying to use Afghanis to curb the Soviet power in Afghanistan, right? Create SALT II, signed by Carter and Brezhnev, but it's not going to be ratified by the Senate, okay? And so that you can start seeing that this really demonstrates to you kind of of his belief of trying to de-escalate tensions between countries. In SALT II, the treaty is between the Soviet Union and the United States. He's trying to de-escalate those frustrations and that anger. Okay. He continues to do this with a bunch of other things. These are some things that are really seen as pretty effective. In 1977, he has at Camp David some peace accords, and it's going to be a negotiation between Israel and Egypt. Okay, so here you have Mechanism begin, and here, and in Egypt you have Anwar el Sadat. Okay, and these two are going to be discussing trying to make Israel and Egypt, who are enemies at this time, trying to get them together in a hopes that the rest of the Middle East will also support this. By 1978, Carter, Sadat had begun these discussions, and they're going to ultimately leave with an agreement. Okay, Israel will agree to take people from Sinai, and Egypt will recognize Israel officially as a country. Okay, so this is a big stepping stone. Okay, it's a big deal that Israel is seen officially by the country Egypt, because a lot of other countries refuse to recognize Israel as a new country. But in 1979 of January, there's going to be what's called the Iranian hostage crisis. Basically, a group of revolutionaries in Iran overthrow the Shah, who's the Ayatollah, or overthrow the Shah, who's the leader of Iran, and they instill or they put in power a person named the Ayatollah, which is a title, kind of like a great priest or rabbi or something. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, okay, and he will be put in charge. He's much more radical. He hates America. He thinks America is the devil, and it causes a lot of frustration between the U.S. and Iran. By November, a year almost later, we're only a couple months shy, 52 Americans have been taken hostage from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. Okay, the outcome is going to be a total of 444 days of hostage negotiations between the United States and Iran. But ultimately, by January 20th, 1981, the hostages will be released. Okay, you may have seen the movie Fargo, which is about this. Okay, and it's kind of an interesting movie with Ben Affleck in it. Okay, so these are just some interesting things that Gerald Ford, or Jimmy Carter, I should say, did in his presidency that some people would see as a success. Jimmy Carter is a one-term president. He does not solve the economic problems coming in, and so a lot of people feel like they've been betrayed. They don't like him. They are tired of him. They don't feel like, well, they may felt like he was honest. They feel like he definitely didn't do anything to help the country out. Okay, so that's our notes there. Let's make sure we have our objectives. What were the tough economic challenges the U.S. faced under Ford and Carter? Well, for Ford, we had high inflation, high unemployment, energy problems, and public distrust of government. Right. So there's the inflation. Right. We had this tight money policy. So these are answers to objective one. And then for the other parts of objective one, we have this as well: changing economy, go from manufacturing to service jobs. And that's going to be the answer to objective one there, okay? So let's look at objective two. How did Ford and Carter address these issues? Well, Ford tries to whip the problems with his slogan, whip, right? Whip inflation now. And cutting the budget with the tight money policy. So kind of some of those answers with objective one are also objective two. And Jimmy Carter is going to try to get us off of oil consumption from other countries, which is going to cause higher inflation and worse economic crisis. Okay, and so we have our answer for objective two. And then objective three, what were significant events that occurred at this time? So for Gerald Ford, right, it would be the Henry Kissinger, Dent, and Helsinki Accords. Okay, that would be a big deal for Gerald Ford. For Jimmy Carter, civil rights, human rights and foreign policy, the Treaty of Panama, SALT II, right? The Iranian hostage crisis, Camp David Accords, all of those would be examples of the Carter years that were issued there, or the significant events that happened in the Carter years. So anyway, these are the different objectives and the answers to them. Hopefully that helps you guys. Thanks so much.